Hey everyone, my name is Jamie and I want to give you some information about my argumentative essay on Huey P. Long. I want to examine whether or not Huey P. Long is a true demagogue because there's a lot of back and forth regarding Huey P. Long. Some scholars say that he is a demagogue and he falls into the categories of demagoguery, like Patricia Roberts Miller and Borman. Others question whether or not he can actually be classified as a demagogue, and if he can't, where does he fall? So they bring up elements of Southern demagoguery and elements of a mass leader and elements of a populist. So those are seen in Jeanson, Williams, Hogan and Tell, Dethloff, and Lee. And so what I want to do with my essay is kind of bring up the definitions. What does Borman describe as a demagogue as applied to Huey P. Long? What does Patricia Roberts Miller describe as a demagogue in regards to Huey P. Long? What do Hogan and Tell have to say about Patricia Roberts Miller's definition as applied to Huey P. Long? And then go into elements of, what is Southern demagoguery? And is it applied to Huey P. Long? And what is populism? And is it applied to Huey P. Long? Huey P. Long grew up in a time where the progressive era met the populist era. And even though he was a Democrat, he held very populist views. And at the time, the populists were the Republicans. They believed in capitalism, and Huey P. Long did believe in capitalism. He just wanted to place an umbrella over the top of it, create a bottom and a top to kind of box in capitalism in the United States and in Louisiana. He also created programs in which he proposed plans to put into place these ideas, but he was fighting a political, corrupt system that he needed to fix before he could actually do good. And so he was very ruthless in his approaches. He filibustered often. He inserted himself into situations that called for impeachment, and he was almost impeached once, but there was a technicality, and so he never became impeached. But it was a wake-up call to him that these people did not agree with his tactics. Instead of saying, should I change my tactics, he became a bulldozer and just kind of crushed the competition. He would buy politicians, he would promote them into positions within his own cabinet and his own campaign. And in that way, he was able to crush the competition. And in his words, he bought them like sacks of potatoes. So he knew that some of the things he was doing were not ethically correct, but he also knew that he was fighting a system that had decades of corruption behind it that he couldn't get through without using these tactics. Huey P. Long entered into the political arena in 1918. He became the governor of Louisiana in 1928. By 1932, he was a Louisiana senator, and in 1935, he was campaigning for the presidency of the United States against President Roosevelt. He was a follower of President Roosevelt, who had some of the same opinions of him under the umbrella of share our wealth, but he didn't believe that Roosevelt was following through with the plan, following through with his campaign. And so when he began to run for the presidency, he placed himself under the ticket of a Republican, because what he wanted to do was get enough votes away from Roosevelt that he thought he could have a true chance, especially with his backing in Louisiana. He controlled most of Louisiana through his tactics, that he thought he had a real shot. In fact, he was so confident that he had a shot at the presidency that he wrote a book entitled My First Days at the White House. So he was very arrogant in that manner. But does that lead itself to demagoguery? Because he did a lot of good in Louisiana. He built roads, bridges, and highways spanning hundreds of miles. He provided textbooks for public education for free. He built the system that is Louisiana State University by upholding programs and creating traditions. He immersed himself in the football team and even coached, even though he didn't know a single thing about playing football. The same is said for the band. He created this idea of the Golden Band from Tigerland, which I was a part of, and I absolutely still love it today. He put himself into the band arena, creating traditions that we see. The song Touchdown for LSU is still played today. He co-wrote that. The walk down the hill into the football team, he created that tradition. He also created the tradition that the band and the football team work in unison together so that there's symbiotic relationships within LSU's structure. He also built the medical branch of Louisiana State University in New Orleans. He built the state capitol building. So Huey P. Long knew he was doing good. He also knew that he was being called a demagogue. And he would ask himself sometimes, am I a demagogue? Sometimes he would say yes, sometimes he would say no. It just depended on his reasoning and his perception of the time. But looking at his speeches, Every Man a King and Share Our Wealth, he's got several ideas that he brings in. He had a four-pronged system that he preached all the time. He wanted to redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor. He said that in Washington there was the rich, the super rich, he called them, that controlled the majority of the wealth. Sometimes he said 12 people controlled it, sometimes he said 10 people controlled it, but he maintained the idea that these people over here held everything. And so everybody that was impoverished, that was in poverty at the time, was due to this system of the super rich. And so what he wanted to do was set an umbrella on that. People that got over $3 million, he wanted to pull every extra away from them, put it into the government and redistribute it. People that made between $10,000 and $3 million, well, they were safe as long as he analyzed, or the government analyzed, how they came up with that number, and then he would figure out what he would redistribute to the people. He wanted to set a cap of $5,000 per household, which included a car, a radio, a house, and the radio was mostly to listen to him speaking over the intercom. He also wanted to give a salary, a minimum wage of $2,500 per year to every American citizen making under $5,000 a year. The next thing he wanted to do was to provide free education across the board, lower tuition rates like he did in Louisiana, free textbooks like he did in Louisiana, scholarship programs like he built in Louisiana. He wanted to help our veterans. He wanted to he wanted to increase their wages, to provide bonuses for them, and to help take care of disabled vets. He also wanted to create pension plans for senior citizens and have the government help them through this redistribution, to not through the tax program, but through the redistribution program, to provide for the senior generation. And he had all of this written in the Share Our Wealth program, which he preached for his presidential campaign. And so what I want to do is look at Borman's article and see, is this demagoguery? Are his speeches demagoguery? Borman says no. He says that the demagogue lays in the character of Huey P. Long. But when we analyze his speeches through Patricia Roberts Miller, we'll find that he actually does fall under the umbrella of demagoguery. He polarized the nation, the rich and the poor. He argued the policies of identity and motive. He created a situation as dire. There were impoverished people. It was the Great Depression. He said that the truth was easy to perceive because the problems of America came from the rich, the super rich. That was the problem. It's so simple, he said. And then he created fallacious arguments in this because he was telling them something that wasn't true. The poverty was due to the Great Depression, not because of the super rich. Even they were struggling during this time. And he placed a lot of emphasis on the needs. He would give examples of people that were put into these programs where they would be thrown in jail for not carrying the correct papers because the government was taking control of everything at the time. And so he did fall under this umbrella, not under Borman's definition, but under Patricia Robert Miller's definition. I also want to look at Williams, who said that Long's tactics were fighting against this corrupt system. And so it wasn't demagoguery he was using. It was methods that he thought needed to be put in place in order to get his agenda through the political arena at the time. Hogan and Tell also look at Patricia Robert Miller's definition and determine that he doesn't really fit under the umbrella of a demagogue. So if that's the case, where does Huey P. Long fall? Deathloff touches on this by bringing into the idea the populist and the progressive era and how Huey P. Long was influenced by that and how he was able to kind of navigate through populism. Even though it was a Republican word at the time, he did hold these ideals and it worked in Louisiana. Lee touches on him as not a demagogue, but as kind of the scapegoat for Southern demagoguery, for the umbrella of Southern demagoguery, because he was an everyman. He was able to speak to the people. And he also built this idea of a definition of populism that fell into a framework of 4 categories of restorationism, defining and labeling the enemy, going against the system, and doing apocalyptic confrontation. And so I want to use these definitions and these terms to kind of see where Huey P. Long lies. If he's not a demagogue, is he a Southern demagogue? If he's not a Southern demagogue, does he fall under populism? I don't believe that me, a person that is not a scholar, is going to be able to definitively make an argument or a strong case for Huey P. Long as either a demagogue or not a demagogue. This is something that is very controversial, but what I hope to do is look at his speeches in lines with Borman and in lines with Patricia Robert Miller and see, does he kind of fall into some of the ideals of demagoguery? Does he use demagogic tactics in his speeches? So that's pretty much where I'm going with it. Bye.